The global stage was once again jolted into surprise and uncertainty when news broke that the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States had allegedly issued arrest warrants for Ibrahim Traoré, the young and fiery leader of Burkina Faso. The mere mention of such a development sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles, media outlets, and ordinary citizens alike. It was a story that combined geopolitics, resource battles, ideological clashes, and the struggle for Africa's independence in the 21st century. Yet what stunned the world even more was not the warrant itself, but the manner in which Traoré responded, a reply that echoed across continents and cemented his place in history as one of the most defiant voices of a new Africa. The narrative begins with the historical tensions between Africa and Western intelligence agencies, which have long been accused of manipulating African politics for strategic and economic gain. From the Cold War era, when the CIA was often linked to covert operations that toppled nationalist African leaders, to more recent interventions masked under the banner of promoting democracy, Africa's political sovereignty has often found itself at odds with powerful foreign entities. Against this backdrop, Ibrahim Traoré's rise as a leader determined to break away from the chains of neocolonialism was already seen as a direct challenge to Western interests. His sharp rhetoric against foreign exploitation of African resources, his bold moves to nationalize key industries, and his alliance building with other emerging powers marked him as a figure who would not bend easily to external pressure. Thus, when reports emerged of an arrest warrant, it was not entirely unexpected. It fit a pattern many analysts had seen before, an African leader attempting to chart an independent path only to find himself targeted by Western agencies. The CIA's justification was reportedly tied to allegations of destabilization, arms procurement, and links to groups viewed as hostile to U.S. interests. But for many across Africa, these justifications seemed hollow, a repetition of accusations used against leaders who dared to resist. Instead of seeing Traoré as a destabilizer, they viewed him as a liberator, a symbol of the continent finally standing tall against external dominance. The reaction inside Burkina Faso was immediate. Crowds poured into the streets, not in fear, but in solidarity with their leader. Chants of defiance against foreign powers reverberated in Ouagadougou and other cities. The symbolism was clear. An attack on Traoré was perceived as an attack on Burkina Faso itself, and indeed on Africa's sovereignty. His supporters argued that the CIA's move was not about justice or security, but about control, specifically over the gold, uranium, and other natural resources that Burkina Faso holds in abundance. In this light, the arrest warrant was seen not as a legal maneuver, but as an economic one, an attempt to silence a leader who dared to declare Africa's resources must serve Africa's people. Then came Traoré's response, the words that electrified the continent and shocked the wider world. Calm, deliberate, but resolute, he dismissed the arrest warrant as irrelevant, stating that no foreign power had the legitimacy to decide the fate of an African leader chosen by Africans. His statement was not simply a personal defense, it was a declaration of sovereignty. He invoked the memory of past African heroes, from Thomas Sankara to Patrice Lumumba, leaders who had been targeted and eliminated because they sought independence from neo-colonial influence. Traoré warned that Africa had learned from history, and this time the continent would not allow its leaders to be removed at the whim of external forces. The speech drew global attention as media outlets across the world replayed his words, dissecting their meaning and implications. In the West, commentators worried that his defiance marked a deepening rift between Africa and its traditional partners. In Africa and much of the global South, however, his words were celebrated as a bold act of resistance proof that Africa was entering a new era where leaders would no longer bow. His reply turned what might have been an episode of intimidation into a rallying cry for independence. International reactions further heightened the drama. Some Western governments expressed concern, urging Burkina Faso to align itself with international norms and hinting at possible sanctions. But others, particularly in Africa, Asia, and parts of Latin America, sided with Traoré. Leaders from neighboring nations quietly voiced support, framing the issue not merely as a personal attack on one president, but as an assault on Africa's collective dignity. This episode exposed once again the changing dynamics of global politics. The old order, where Western intelligence agencies operated with near impunity in Africa, was being challenged by a new reality. Africa was no longer isolated. New partnerships with Russia, China, Turkey, and Middle Eastern powers had given leaders like Traoré options. No longer dependent solely on the West for economic and military support, African nations were exploring multipolarity, creating a world in which Western dominance could be checked. The CIA's warrant in this context looked less like a tool of justice and more like a relic of a fading era. Traoré's reply also carried a moral weight. By positioning himself as a defender of not only Burkina Faso, but of all Africa, he tapped into a deep well of Pan-African sentiment. He portrayed the struggle not as one man against an agency, but as Africa against centuries of domination. In doing so, he ignited a wave of Pan-African solidarity that resonated from Dakar to Nairobi, from Johannesburg to Algiers. Intellectuals, activists, and ordinary citizens spoke out, praising his courage and demanding that Africa's sovereignty be respected. For many, it was not simply about Traoré's fate, but about affirming Africa's right to self-determination. The economic dimension cannot be overlooked. Analysts noted that Burkina Faso's push to reclaim its gold and uranium industries had already rattled global markets. If Traoré were to succeed in creating a model where African resources were fully owned and managed by Africans, it could inspire similar moves across the continent, threatening the resource supply chains upon which the West heavily depends. In this light, the arrest warrant could be seen as an act of economic preemption, an attempt to halt a dangerous precedent before it spread. But Traoré's reply turned that calculation upside down, because instead of isolating him, it gave his ideas a larger audience. By challenging the CIA directly, he made himself a symbol of resistance, and symbols are far more difficult to suppress. The episode also brought back haunting memories of Africa's past. The ghost of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader assassinated in 1987 under murky circumstances, widely believed to have involved foreign complicity, loomed large in public consciousness. Many drew direct parallels between Sankara and Traoré, arguing that history was repeating itself. Yet, unlike in Sankara's time, today's Africa is more connected, more aware, and perhaps better positioned to resist external manipulation. Social media amplified every word of Traoré's reply, ensuring that his defiance reached millions instantly and could not be silenced. For Washington, the warrant quickly became a diplomatic headache. What was perhaps intended as a show of strength appeared instead as overreach, sparking debates even within the U.S. establishment. Critics questioned the wisdom of targeting a leader whose popularity in Africa was surging and who had positioned himself as a champion of anti-imperialism. Far from weakening him, the move risked elevating him into a global icon. Ultimately, Traoré's reply shocked the world not because it was unexpected, but because it was so unflinching. He did not hedge his words, did not seek compromise, and did not attempt to soften his defiance. Instead, he turned the tables, accusing the CIA and its backers of historical crimes against Africa, and warning that such tactics would no longer work. His words resonated far beyond Burkina Faso, giving voice to frustrations long felt across the global South. This episode marks more than just a diplomatic clash. It symbolizes the broader transformation of global politics in the 21st century. The world is shifting from unipolarity to multipolarity, from Western dominance to a more balanced distribution of power. Leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, whether one agrees with their methods or not, embody this shift. Their defiance signals that the old tools of intimidation are losing their effectiveness. Arrest warrants, sanctions, and threats no longer guarantee submission. In fact, they may now produce the opposite effect, creating martyrs and fueling movements for independence. As history continues to unfold, the CIA's warrant and Traoré's reply will be remembered as a turning point, a moment when Africa once again asserted its voice against global powers. For some, it will be seen as reckless defiance. For others, it will be remembered as a moment of courage. But for Africa itself, it is a reminder that the struggle for sovereignty is ongoing, and that leaders willing to confront the most powerful institutions in the world are reshaping the destiny of a continent long underestimated. The story is far from over. But one thing is clear: the world is watching, and Ibrahim Traoré's reply has already entered the annals of history as one of the boldest challenges to Western power in modern times. His words echo a warning, a hope, and a declaration that Africa will no longer bow, that its leaders will speak with their own voice, and that no warrant, however powerful its source, can silence a continent determined to rise.